What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 734, I think. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, you're in a bit of a hurry today, huh? You got a trip coming up and trying to get everything in order before you go?
Well, you know how normally I like to keep myself a little overclocked in terms of things and responsibilities?
Yeah.
Well, that is always true, but now I have to do, 3 days of work and pack and get ready and drop the dog off at the dog sitters. And you know what? But I'll always make time for my second favorite podcast co-host.
Whoa, you don't even have another one.
That's true. And also,
and you're not going to say that BK. Come on, now he didn't.
Yeah. he listens to LR sometimes, so
Oh, you just got to get a sidewinder in on old BK. I hope he's doing well. So we're going to do the Sunset Show this time around for LCI, Lost Caverns of Ixalan. It is time to say goodbye because early next week, actually, we're going to be doing the set review for Murders at Karlov Manor. So this is where we say bye-bye to LCI. Before we jump into that, I want to say thank you to each and every person who is a patron of ours on patreon.com/limited resources. That's the way you can support, any creators that you really love. Many of them, most of them even, I would say, will have a Patreon. And we have had one since Patreon started. We really appreciate each and every person who supports us. If you do decide to support us on Patreon, you get a thank you card and a sticker in the mail, regardless of which level you are at. So thanks again to everybody over there. Also, we want to thank Ultimate Guard for their sponsorship of the podcast. Ultimate Guard is the best place to go if you need supplies for your cards. And we all need those things. You got to manage your collection, manage your decks, manage your individual cards, and they have products for all of those things. They have long boxes that you can put multiple decks in. They have individual sized for one, either commander, or you can get them, for constructed or for your limited stuff. And then of course you're going to need sleeves. Luis and I particularly like the katanas, but they have others as well. Really, they make the best stuff in the business. If you just go do comparison side by sides, they are really, really awesome products, well thought out, really manufactured to a high level as well. And we highly recommend checking them out. You can go to ultimateguard.com to check out their product lineup. You can buy any of their stuff from your local game store or your favorite online retailer. And we thank them for their sponsorship of the show. Luis, let's do one last LCI Crack-A-Pack. Let me find it here. There it is. Before we jump into the categories, first card out. Well, this just makes me sad right off the bat. It's Captivating Cave.
Yeah, we're going to get into the caves thing more when you look about the wins and the losses of the set. But suffice to say that I think caves, while not a total loss, I know some people have gotten them to work. It added, an element to the draft set. Mostly for me, it's the potential that it could have been that makes me a little bummed out when I see the caves cards.
Yep, me too. And that's why I'm a little bummed out to see Captivating card. Next is Petrify, which ended up being fine.
Totally solid card. It was the cards my opponents discovered most when I was playing in the Arena Open. I just had 3 discovers in a row hit Petrify, though I actually think I won all of those games. So that wasn't the end of the world.
But that's good because Petrify is a nice one to hit usually, depending on the board state. Yeah. Saurian Sandwing is next. This is the white version, the plane cycling of the land cyclers.
The Lord of the Rings just ruined us. Like we can't look at these and not think about Lorien Revealed and Oliphant and Troll of Khazad-dûm. You want to know how good these cards are? Eagles of the North is in my vintage cube. And that card you basically don't really want to cast, but it's still good enough.
Yeah, and the Troll and the Oliphant have been in the online, the Magic Online vintage cube as well. And they're kind of staples now. They're just really good. But, looking at the Sandwing, these cards were still playable, but we just were higher on them coming in than they ended up actually performing at.
Well, I think that was true in March of the Machines because we thought that Land Cyclers were going to be good, and then they weren't in that set. I think coming into this set, I feel like we were pretty even keeled about these were pretty bad last time they showed up. Let's take a look and see how these turn out. And it turned out they're actually better than they were in March of the Machine. Mm-hmm. I think Descend went a pretty long way towards that. So I mean, I played a lot of the bristleback and the nurturing bristleback and the spike tail, whatever, the black and the green ones. I played a fair amount of. Not quite so much the others.
Yeah, this one, for example, Soaring Sandwing, it ended up at 54.5% games in hand win rate, which is kind of our shortcut for how well it did. As we've talked about multiple times on the show, it is not the end all, but it does give you a snapshot into how well a card performed overall. And of course, now that we're at the end of the run, we've got kind of a full picture and a lot of data to go off of. And, for reference, 54.5% is effectively dead average for the player pool that this is sampling, which are people that have 17 lands. It means it's it's exactly at that middle mark of a 50% performer after you adjust for the play skill of the player pool. Next one was much better than that. Oaken Siren.
Oh, this is maybe my favorite card in the entire set, or at least very close to it. I really like Lodestone Needle too. I thought that one played well.
Well, are we going to find out what your favorite card in the entire set was a little later?
I said maybe. That's why I said
I know. I'm asking. Is this? Yeah. This is one on contention. Okay.
I think that Oaken Siren is just so smooth, just like butter. It's a flyer. It wears Zoetic Glyph or Explore counters really nicely. Taps for mana for all the cards you really care about. It even has Vigilance, wears equipment. It's a pirate. It's an artifact. It just kind of does it all. And I'm not really unhappy to take Oaken Siren first pick here.
Yeah, we talk about these cards sometimes. I call them pivot cards. Sometimes cards that go into multiple archetypes, and this is the perfect example. Next is Adaptive Gem Guard.
This one was solid. It was a way to have kind of a burly creature at slightly less than you would expect to pay for it, like the low curve artifact decks are well, here's my 4 mana 6/6 or 7/7 with a little work. And sometimes this thing got up to 11/11 and they had the dino decks had to start chumping it. You didn't need a lot of these. You didn't need to prioritize it. I would never take it over Oaken Siren unless it was the end of a draft and I had 3 of them and I needed a finisher. But yeah, a fine card, but no Oaken Siren.
Yeah, to me, it's definitional C-. It's just there it is. You can put it into your deck. Oh, next is Atali's Favor. Boy, we got a nice pack here for our last one.
Yeah, Atali's Favor was definitely one of the cards we underrated at first, and didn't take long to kind of reveal how great it was. At its best in the red-green decks, but still totally fine. Red-blue, red-white, whatever. Not so much in red-black, just because you really shouldn't draft red-black very often in the set. But I would take Oaken Siren over Atali's Favor. I don't think that's a crazy pick to make.
I think that's kind of a crazy pick to make. Maybe not. Maybe crazy is too strong of a word, but I would take a Favor.
That's fair.
Yeah, I think the thing about Favor that just stood out after we started casting it, but maybe just didn't quite resonate enough was that it's Discover 3. That you're getting as much mana as you put into it back out again. Sometimes, oftentimes with cards like this, especially, going back to the Cascade days, it would be 1 less than whatever you were casting the thing for. And that's a very different card. When you can discover into 3 mana and get, how much mana do you think Atali's Favor is worth without Discover?
Without Discover, less than 1 mana, half a mana, maybe?
Half a mana, 3/4 of a mana. So, you get it now, and then if you get, especially a 3-drop off it. Yeah, so really close. Oaken Siren, Atali's Favor. Next is Screaming Phantom.
So you would just take, so you're saying is you would just take the higher win rate card. You think it's kind of crazy to take the Siren?
This might be biased, but I also really like red green dinosaurs, and Atali's Favor is the glue for the 2 types of red green dinosaurs, but it's the better card in the better version in my mind, which is the aggressive one. So this is not non-uncommons. This is right where I want to be.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it is at its best in the red green dinos. If you have a predilection towards drafting that deck, I can see making the pick. The Siren is a higher win rate card, though.
Oh, okay.
I was trying to trap
you were trapping me. I did assume Atali's Favor was higher win rate. Oh, that's interesting.
It is not, but if Sirkovitz were here, and thank God he's not, I was on his podcast earlier this week. So only so much Sirkovitz I can get per week, but it it's also contextual with like blue having a really high win rate because all the blue commons are good and work together well, and et cetera, et cetera. But yes, the cards are very close. You could take whichever one you want. I would take Oak and Siren.
Okay, fair enough. Screaming Phantom.
Definitional of filler, like it's like C minus D plus level filler, where if your Descend deck, which is already a deck you don't really want to be in, misses, you could take this card. Right.
Yeah, this next one's interesting. This is a very archetypical version of what we see these days, which is Malamute Veteran. That's the 4 and a green 5/4. And like, man, this is just the perfect example of the type of 5-drop that we talk about these days, right? Where it's like, you read the card, you do not find anything that you don't like about it, but it struggles, excuse me, sorry. It struggles to find its place in the format because 5-drops are not really where you want to be. Well, in general and limited these days, there's only so many slots for 5s, but certainly in this set, a big slow 5 is not where you want to be.
Yeah, I don't think I ever put that card into a deck, and I don't really recall losing to it. I have played against it, but it never really did anything.
No, but I mean, it's a 5-mana 5/4 trampler with a relevant sometimes ability. Like, man, the bar is very high. The world we live
in these days.
Exactly. Next is Ancestral Reminiscence. Speaking of the world we live in these days.
Yeah, card draw spells that just do nothing else and cost a lot of mana. Nope. Not the format or the year or maybe the decade for those.
Right. And this is, what's it called, right? This is just a functional reprint of
Sift.
And Sift in its day was very, very strong. But yeah, like you said, not anymore.
I can't claim to have like the super granular level of detail about what was the best common in like Tempest Stronghold draft because I wasn't drafting back then. I've done a bunch of the drafts, and I know the format. So I don't know if it's like the second best blue common, the third best. It's definitely not the best, but it's definitely in contention for the good cards, and you want them in your deck. And then in these formats, it's just straight up unplayable.
Right. And I don't remember how well it did. The last time we saw it was M19. Which was a while ago. That means it came out
in most M sets. It was probably pretty great. I mean, the M sets, the core sets tended to be slower and grindier.
Yeah, but here, Ancestral Reminiscence, really not even a card you consider. Oltec Archaeologists. Here's another
dorky
5-drop that does things that when you read, you're like, this seems fine, and then you just don't see it on the battlefield very often. And that brings us to our uncommons. Our first one is Stinging Cave Crawler.
This is a very solid card.
Yeah.
It's in a set where the color balance was a little bit different, or the different, like the best decks weren't the like low drop blue red white decks or red green dinos. I do got to give credit. Dinos is great too. Stinging Cave Crawler would be, I think, better than Atali's Favor and Oak and Siren, or at least very close to them. And I don't think you can really justify taking it over either of those cards. Black is just too weak.
Yeah, it's a good design, right? Like it comes down, it's good defensively and lets you build up your Descend, and then once you do,
I just looked it up just out of curiosity. Yeah, it's 53.6% win rate, like below the average card for a 17 lands user, and that's again a reflection on what Black is doing more than the card itself.
Wow, that's brutal. Yeah. Next uncommon is Helping Hand.
Well, I do like this card in the right deck. It's actually a little bit like Atali's Favor, where it pays you for having 3-drops, but the white decks aren't always going to end up there, and it's certainly not a card you want to take early. This is kind of like, well, it looks like I got enough support for this, I can run it.
Yeah, it's weird. I actually anticipated this card being better than it ended up being. And I don't even like cards like this. It just looked like a very efficient play for, especially after we played the set for a little while, and like things die. People are trading resources very early in the game. And, the turn where you play like a 2-drop and then Helping Hand back a 3-drop or something can be really a big swing, and it just didn't play out like that. Ooh, we got a nice one here. We got Ruin Lurker Bat.
Oh, I do like that one. You probably are supposed to take Ruin Lurker Bat over any of these cards.
I think so.
It's too good. The thing is, it's 1/1 flying lifelink, but by itself, it's a 2-point life swing. And you can kind of shortcut that. Like, yes, a 1-mana 2/1 flyer would be better than a 1/1 flying lifelink, I think, for most of the white decks. But it's pretty close to where, when you're both racing, a 2-point life swing is very similar to gaining 2 a turn or dealing 2 a turn.
Right.
Deal 1, game 1. is comparable, but then every counter you put on it is like double counted basically. So
Exactly.
yeah, if you get one counter on this or put one equipment on this, like it's just even a stupid Sunfire Torch or something, your opponent can't win the race while this thing's hitting them generally. And it's a 1-mana card, so they're whatever removal spell trades down on mana, and it's just going to get you random scries every here and there. Yeah, Rune Lurker Bat is great.
Yeah, map tokens. It's just really, really good. We've got, it looks like a couple of double face cards here. One of them is our rare, but the other one is Inverted Iceberg.
I do like Inverted Iceberg. I don't think we could justify Inverted Iceberg over Rune Lurker Bat or even Oaken Siren.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Good card though. We did actually get a rare. It's Ogier Ixalan, the red Ogier. That's the 4-mana 4/4 trample one.
Yeah, I mean, 4-mana 4/4 tramples, strangely enough, not really ahead of the curve. It's like fine, but I mean, compared to like a Pathfinding Axedraw at common, like which one's better? I would rather have the Axedraw generally. But what if you add in, you just basically kill them with Sunshot Militia just completely out of nowhere, right? Each ping deals 4. And the fact that if this dies, you get a land, and then sometimes you even bring it back. Though that's less likely. It's mostly just it gives you a rebate of a land when it dies. I would probably take one of the blue cards. I actually think you could take the Iceberg over Siren, but I would start with Siren. I like my decks to be a little like curve out a little more smoothly.
But would you take the Rune Lurker Bat overall, or would you actually just?
Yes, I would take the Rune Lurker Bat over both the blue cards as well and the Ogier.
Yeah, me too. It's a weird world we live in, but that definitely feels the most correct. The one thing that could nudge me towards the Ogier Ixalan is the slight build around nature that you mentioned, and the fact that we're getting it pack 1, pick 1, so I can have my eyes open to those things. But man, I'm telling you, I really think that if you're sitting down at a Pro Tour draft, that you're supposed to take Rune Lurker Bat.
Yeah, I agree.
Feels weird, but that's where it's at. All right, so that's our last crack-a-pack there. Let's get into the categories. If you could summarize the set in one sentence, what would it be?
One drops or bust. I mean, that is the biggest headliner. The Dinos deck, the Descend deck, these are decks, and Dinos in fact was really good. But if I think about this set in 2 years, I'll be like, Lost Caverns, right? That was the set with all the Jeskai 1-drops. It's kind of like where it occupies my mind.
Yeah, and by the way, we just took one, right? For
so there we go. Perfect crack-a-pack.
Yeah, for me,
perfect crack-a-pack because we just took a 1-drop 1/1 flyer over a 4-mana god.
Yeah, the mythic god that you're supposed to just be super stoked to slam. Exactly. For my sentence is missed opportunities, but close enough. This, to me, there was a lot more potential for this set, and I had higher hopes for it than it ended up reaching, but it ended up being an okay set. It wasn't like terrible or anything. So that's kind of how I see it. What did turn out to be the best archetypes?
Certainly the Jeskai decks. So all 3 color pairs, and to be clear, not generally more than 2 colors, just blue-red, white-blue. I think I enjoyed drafting white-blue the most, but followed by blue-red, followed by red-white in terms of like what I enjoyed. I don't know which color pair ended up being ultimately the best from the data that we have and can try to analyze, but all of those were good. And then red-green dinos was, I think, just about on par. I mean, actually, in last week in the Arena Open, I drafted red-green dinos in both my decks. Like that was on day 2. And I was happy with both of my decks as well. So those were good. You might notice black is conspicuously absent, and that's because the black decks weren't nothing. I drafted a lot of black-green and a decent amount of black-blue, but way more black-green as it turned out. But black-white just didn't really come together, and black-red was kind of horrid. So I would say that the best decks were certainly Jeskai's plus red-green.
Yeah, my favorite color pair was red-green dinos, and then red-white artifact craft was my second. And I think that those were two, like those decks felt like very well rounded. Also, one thing that I find myself being attracted to when it comes to like a deck that I'll go back to over and over again is if there's wiggle room within the archetype, meaning that sometimes your red green Dino's deck is pretty darn aggressive, right? You're really trying to kind of run your opponent over. And there's other times where it's like, no, I'm going to ramp a little bit. I'm going to get a little value later on, by being able to cast a 5-drop or a 6-drop or something and not just be dead that turn. And I'm going to take advantage of that. And I like that. And Blue-White had a little bit of wiggle room in there too. Sometimes it was a slower, like full-on craft setup, and other times it was a little bit more low to the ground, kind of flood the board type of thing. So I don't know. To me, those are the types of archetypes that I usually end up going to because I can maneuver within that and not only draft the deck one way. And that means that, I have a better chance of succeeding with it overall.
Yeah, that is a really good point to make, which is that there were 2 red-green Dinos decks. There was the low curve beatdown deck, and then the generally worse or like backup plan of ramp. I don't think you would always consider ramp a backup plan, but just like you, I want Burning Sun's Cavalry into Atali's favor,
right?
Hitting an Armored Kincaller. That's what I want to do.
Oh, that's the dream.
And with Pathfinding Axejaw as like kind of near the top of your curve, and you have maybe Land Cyclers or 1 Cavern Stomper, as the rest.
Right.
But if you get a couple of, the Ixali's Lore Colors, the 1-drops that tap for Dino mana, and you get maybe some Poison Dart Frogs, and you have some cheap interaction, and then the Kincaller actually is fantastic here too, you can play Dino Ramp. So having 2 decks that felt differently in the same color pair, I always think that's actually a triumph of design. I think that we are plenty critical when it comes to things we don't like, and I think complimentary when it comes to things we do. And I really like it when someone's like, I drafted red green, and you're like, okay, but which red green deck? That's awesome.
Right. That's great.
That shows an efficient use of common slots, because that's what generally determines the archetypes. And having cards like Armored Kincaller, which really like play both decks well, is awesome.
Yeah, and that's the part where we come in, right? Our job is to help you, the listener, and also ourselves recognize those cards that are the really important ones that go into either version that you can't go
cards.
wrong.
That's what you like calling them.
Pivot cards, yeah. And it's interesting to find a pivot card within an archetype, not just one that covers multiples. What were some of the underrated cards?
So initially underrated were the 1-drops.
That was the big thing.
That's not to say that we, or even the general public, thought they were bad to start with. I think at this point, everyone knows they're not, but they were still underrated. Like, it still wasn't clear. Like, if you asked me day 3 of the format, would you take Rune Lurker Bat or Oger Oxonal? I would have not only wanted to take the God just because I wanted to see how it played out, but also I would have thought it was a better card. And I no longer think that, and I don't need to see it play out anymore. So the 1-drops ended up being a little bit better than they looked. Another underrated card was basically the kind of dorky looking dinosaur cards. Cavern Stomper was definitely underrated. Like, even like the Pathfinding Axejaw or the Armored Kincaller, like, they didn't look like cards I would be happy to take early and have in my deck, and that's where they ended up.
Yeah. What were some of the controversial cards?
Well, I think the Descend cards were kind of controversial even up until the end. I feel like you had some people who were like, well, I kind of like drafting these decks, and there's ways to make this work. I know Sam Black talked about that a lot. I talked about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I talked about it on the podcast plenty. And I feel it was still controversial because generally, we had to go through a lot of hoops explaining why this worked and how it worked. And it didn't seem to mesh generally because, I don't know, you look at the win rates, people aren't winning that much with these cards. So like cards like Waterlogged Hulk or Mineshaft Spider, those I think were a bit controversial. I will almost say the removal was controversial because it's not like people were passing you, Join the Deads super late, but it turned out like the removal wasn't that good. And actually, if we want to talk about the cards that we were wrong about in the set reviews, the removal is actually like a big category where, again, it's like, it's not like we said the removal's the nuts, you should always take it. But we were like, yeah, this looks pretty good. This is an efficient removal spell using the kind of rubrics that we've used in the past. And it turns out that very quickly it became obvious 3-mana removal against great 1-drops, just not a good place to land. Which is funny because a card we were also wrong about was Unlucky Drop, a 4-mana removal spell, but ended up being really good, in part because blue is a lot better and more aggressive than it is in most sets. It's both better overall and more aggressive, which means even mediocre looking blue removal like Unlucky Drop, which is in every set and is almost always mediocre was actually actively good in this set.
Yeah, it's really interesting how that part plays out, because it's sort of like, if there's a major premise that you need to know before you grade cards and before you understand how a set works, it will ripple effect on everything else. Like if you tell me, day 0, you say, look, the 1-drops in the set are really strong. There's a core of them, like, enough of them so that you see them basically every draft and every game, that they're going to be around, and they are going to dictate a lot of how the rest of the set plays out. Now you start making these adjustments all the way down the line. You go, okay, well, like you just mentioned, removal that costs 3 mana, even if it's good, isn't where I want to be, right? Because I'm all of a sudden falling way behind on tempo every single game. And you can start going from there. You know what else kind of stinks when the 1-drops are really strong and playable? 5-drops. Right? Just expensive cards. They're not very good. So I don't really care what it says on it. Like, it might be a very good card, but you're going to have to significantly downgrade it, because that's not where the game is won or lost by the time you get to turn 5. As we saw when we had Sutcliffe on, much of the equity in the game is dictated in the first 3 turns in this set. And that's a lot because of the 1-drops here. And if you're the person that has one when your opponent doesn't, you have a significant edge. We saw that in the numbers that Sirkovitz brought. It's a huge deal. And again, there's this ripple effect that goes down the line and can really kind of bulldoze any of the kind of heuristics that we use to grade things like, hey, Join the Dead's a really good removal spell. Well, it is. That is true in a vacuum, but in the non-vacuum of this set, it underperforms. Yeah.
One of the cool fallout from that, and it didn't quite work, so I don't want to give him full credit, but one of the cool things about that was I really did like using cards like Armored Kincaller and Mineshaft Spider to stop the 1-drops, finding creative ways like blockers and life gain instead of removal, because removal is usually the way you stop threats. Having that not be the thing that actually works was kind of neat. There was a minor neat part.
Yeah, and it is cool because normally we think of removal as a 1-for-1 type scenario, but if you can put out a 2/4 with reach, that can brick 2 or 3, or in some weird cases even 4 small creatures if they don't have their own removal spell for it. And now you're in this back and forth tug of war, because now it's like, okay, well, if you want to kill my 4 toughness creature, you're going to need a removal spell that costs 3 or 4 mana, but you don't want those either. Right? Because if you face the 1-drop stack, now you're the one holding the bag with your expensive, clunky removal spell against a bunch of efficient, cheap creatures. And that's a cool little sub-dynamic that can pop up. What card had your favorite artwork?
Poison Dart Frog. I really liked it. That was Julia Metzger.
I was so mad because that's what I was going to pick, and then I saw that you had. So, by the way, that's the first time that's ever happened, I think. But I did pick a different one. I picked one of my favorite things in the whole world, which are dinosaurs. I've loved dinosaurs forever. And it's Polani's Hatcher by Aaron Miller, which is a cool piece of artwork. This is something that happens a lot, with the art direction, where it's like, hey, this is a dinosaur, but also it's got an egg with it, or friends with it, or it's a bird with 2 little birds, and you'll see them kind of peppered into the artwork. And I thought, this one looked like what we think a real dinosaur looked like, at least now. It changes kind of a lot, but, pretty good job there by Aaron. This is sad, man. This category is usually one that I look forward to the most. And here it's like a big womp, which is what were the best build-around cards in the set.
So this is kind of weird place for build-arounds, where on the one hand, it's like, the artifact and craft stuff did work. Oaken Siren, Lodestone Needle, Captain Storm, even like the Golem Master's mural or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it didn't feel like I was doing a build around where, I'm going to take this card first pick and it's going to send my draft on a completely different trajectory than a normal draft. One of the best examples is Luris. And not everything can be Luris. It's actually kind of the GOAT build around, where it's so fun to draft a companion Luris deck. Whenever I got it in March of the Machines or in Ikoria, it was just near to peak drafter. But at the end of the day, I didn't really feel like I had that experience in this set. The closest was Descend. And I do think the Descend cards, like I think specifically, like if you got to first pick Grim Captain's Throne or Chupacabra Echo, like the kind of cards that were like, yeah, I'm gonna just completely change how I draft,
Yeah.
That was cool. But in general, like despite the artifact synergies working, it didn't really work or it didn't really feel like a build around because like all the cards are artifact and works with artifact. Like
Exactly.
I didn't feel like I was drafting a build around deck when I cast Captain Storm and cast 2 artifacts.
That's the difference between a build around and a high synergy card, right?
Yeah.
High synergy cards do pay you off and they do reward you for putting things around them, but they tend to fit into archetypes that already exist pretty cleanly, right? Build around cards make you change your draft picks. They say the thing that everybody else values is different than what I value now, like significantly. And also to me, the definition of a build around is it gives you a dream, right? It gives you an idea. It gives you this thing where you go, oh man, if I got all artifacts with this thing, like that would be insane, right? Like that would be something that you can't do without this card. In a normal deck, even in a high synergy deck, you cannot do what I'm about to do with this thing. And that's exciting. That's like a really fun part of Limited. And as we've said before, it also tends to be one of the things that can carry the torch on making a set redraftable after your 30th, 40th, 50th draft, if you're junkies like Luis and I, and can really, give you something to aim for that isn't just, I'm trying to draft the very best version of Red Green Dinosaurs for the 30th time. That's fine. That doesn't get that old. But man, when you open up some sick mythic or rare that's a build around, or maybe it's just an uncommon and you're like, all right, I'm doing it. That's fun. That's where you don't know where this is going to go, right? If you open up a good Red Green Dino, or a one drop or whatever, you kind of know where it's going to end up, assuming it doesn't get completely train wrecked for you. It's just a matter of how good or bad is it going to be. It's a degree thing. But man, when you open up like a true build around, you don't know. And that's really fun. It's exciting to do that. And it just felt very lacking in this set. There was really no dreams to be dreamed here.
Yeah, I kind of felt the same way. Though I do think we both liked the set quite a bit more than what feels like the average sentiment was. Mm-hmm. I don't think it gets high marks here. And honestly, Caves could have been this, but it really wasn't.
Should we talk about that now? Because that's probably the saddest thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, it is part of, you can talk about it here or in the set wins and losses, but here is a fine place to be. The biggest thing with the Caves deck was it just, like I said in like the third show after the set came out, something like that. My main problem was to make Caves good, you had to A, get enough Caves, critical mass.
Yep.
B, have enough payoffs, and C, have your colors be correct. And then in order to have it actually have that thing work out really well, you just needed a lot of help. And it didn't feel like the Caves deck had that help. It just,
no.
I'm not saying it could never work or never come together or any of those things. It just wasn't very, very consistent.
I would consider it a full flop. Like, yeah, I know that
I'm
technically,
not quite sure I'm ready to say that.
I never saw it. Like, I know, I hear you saying, well, it technically could come together, but like, is that true? I felt like it was really bad. Like, I tried, man. And like, I know that I'm just one person, so sample size, but like, I never saw people, destroying everybody with Caves. I never felt like anybody got a good handhold to figure out how to draft it. And because it felt like to me that even if you had a good version, like where I said, look, here's 4 cave payoffs, including like 2 of the really good ones or whatever, and a bunch, basically all the caves you can handle and all the other stuff, that even then the deck wasn't that good. Like it didn't compete well with the way that the format played out. Because to me, they missed on 2 levels. And, really you have to stick the landing on none. I mean, on all of them to make these kind of decks work. But basically it was a step too slow in general. And then it combined the fact that the format was relatively fast and, did prioritize the very, very early stage of the game where you were doing nothing, like absolutely nothing. And those 2 things come together. And I don't know, I feel like it's fairly clear that it was just a a complete whiff.
I guess I'm hesitant to call it a complete whiff, but I certainly don't think it was a success. I don't think it was like a 0%er where Caves could never be good, and there were good Caves decks, but it really wasn't a good deck to draft.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, we can talk about it more at the end with thing if there's anything else we want to add, but that should have been it. I also feel that there is a little bit of an unfair thing with the Caves, which is that it makes me think of the Gates deck. Right. And,
yes,
and that's
which was great.
Yeah.
The Gates deck. It was,
yeah.
The Gates deck felt super satisfying, but here's a big difference. All the Gates tapped for 2 different colors of mana. So you just take every gate. At the end of it, your mana base was fine. The Caves didn't. And also the payoffs were better.
Yeah. That's
and there
totally
were more gates. So
yeah.
It's like, I guess actually, sorry. I don't know that there were more gates. It felt like there were a lot, but I guess Caves are comparable, but there was way too much going on there that the Caves deck didn't have, right?
Yeah. Sad because I was really excited when I saw it. I think also I got my hopes up that this would be the type of format where you'd have enough breathing room to play a Caves deck. And I have to say, once again, we didn't. And it is really starting to be a long time now since especially a 2-color set wasn't emphasized on speed. I don't mean like super, super fast, but where like you needed to be doing things early that affected the board. Like you had to. And I really feel like I'm starting to get concerned that the design methodology that they use now presents a very consistent and on average quite good experience, but that it is starting to A, trend only in that direction, and B, like I wouldn't mind a super slow set. Like we haven't had one of those in a while, especially a 2-color one. Just give me something, where like you laugh at, there have been sets where like if you play a 2-mana 2/2, you're just like, oh dude, no. Like
Rise of the Eldrazi, M11, M14 come to mind as like,
yeah.
These are the sets that really, really rewarded you knowing how to draft counter spells and card draw and ramp into 6 drops and stuff like that.
Right. And I get it.
Drops.
Right. And I get it that not every set can be like that. And I wouldn't want that either. But I'm starting to get to the point of like, are we ever going to see anything like that again? Like, cause that is fun. That is something that people enjoy too. Which card still looks good when you read it, but it just doesn't see play.
For me, it's Grasping Shadows.
Oh, my beloved
I really wanted that card to be like, all right, you land a decently sized creature, you play this. The fact that you're gaining 3 or 4 life when you attack makes up for the tempo loss, and then you get some good card advantage at the end of it. And that was extremely not how it played out.
Why is that? Do you have any sense for why it didn't work? Because in this format, it feels like it should have. Like people are de-emphasizing removal, your medium-sized creatures attacking profitably into their small ones and swinging the race, as you mentioned. It still looks good when I read it, dude. I can't I can't shake it.
Well, I don't exactly know why it didn't work.
Maybe one well-timed removal spell too much, or maybe it's just because it's in black.
Well, black historically doesn't have the best creatures, and I think part of it was not necessarily just Grasping at Shadows itself. It was also that black was kind of weak. Like when black's removal isn't good, it kind of makes black not a very appealing color to play.
I wish they would have told us that the title of that card is what we were doing by trying to play it.
Yes.
A little earlier.
Grasping at Straws.
Right. Was this a Prince or a Pauper set?
I think you could say this was a Pauper set. We just took a 1-drop, 1/1 flyer, which I guess was uncommon, but over a rare or mythic god. And in general, like it felt like you could compete really nicely with all commons in your deck.
It's interesting because this is another trend that we've seen. I mean, Prince sets are more rare. Like it's considered a bit of a mistake if they let a Prince set slip through, but it has been a really long time since we would call it a full-on Prince set. Like, yeah. Again, I think that the design the design methodology leads to that not being the case now. What's the "It's a bad card, but I love it anyway" award winner? And for me, it was also Grasping Shadows. because this is sort of a story, right? Like I look at it, it still looks good. I know it's not good, but I still love it. And I look at, and it just sort of keeps circling around. But I love cards like that. What was the one? The one that was actually really good?
Probably Waterlogged Hulk. Like I at the end of the day, I kind of felt like Black-Green Descend was real and Blue-Black felt like more had to come together. It felt like the Caves deck more. So I can't really justify doing that. But like one of my favorite things to do in Limited was like play a turn one Ghoul Caller's Bell in old Innistrad and start like self-milling and stuff. I like that plays to a part of me that I like, but it's not something I can really recommend, unfortunately.
What is I literally never win with it, but it always seems to beat me card. I had Abyssal Gorestalker. And the reason that I say this is because I really tried to make that a thing. And every time I played it, if I was lucky enough to even have it hit the battlefield, it would be like it killed itself and one of my creatures and two of theirs. And then they had something left over. And it was like, this just doesn't work. But it felt like every time somebody played it against me, it just devastated me and took out my two awesome creatures. And I had nothing left over and they had something. I'm like, why does this ever work? I mean, maybe it's just the way I draft or whatever, but I never seem to be able to put it together where the Gorestalker, was a blowout. It was always like me spending 1 million mana to even up the board.
Yeah, I think for me, it was probably Pirate Hat was actually one of the cards that in theory it could be good. And I've had it be good a few times, but it generally wasn't that good for me. And then my opponents would frequently just be like, well, turn 2 Oaken Siren, turn 3 Pirate Hat, attack, do this, then the next turn do that. Like it worked out a little better for my opponents than for me, except for one of the first drafts I did, my opponent played 4 of them. That didn't actually work out.
Wow. That's a collection right there.
Also, like, think about the mechanics of that. Like, how, are you wearing like, I guess 4 stacked on top of each other?
Yeah.
Or do you have like one and then you're like holding the other 2 or what's going on?
And at some point your enemies are like just laughing,
of hats.
Right? Like they're just like, what's up with this guy and his hats? My opponent played this card, so now I must win or quit Magic forever card of the set.
You had the good answer to this. I'll let you go, and I couldn't compete once you put that down.
I put Hunter's Blowgun.
Oh, yeah,
because it's always some 1 mana card. It seems like where there, you're like, okay, you sit, your match gets paired up. All right, here we go. Let's go. And they go land, and then they tap mana. You're like, oh no, I don't have like a Guidewing or something good. And then they play the thing, and you're like, uh-oh, right? So they play Hunter's Blowgun, and you're like, all right, roll up the sleeves. The career's on the line for this one, because if I can't beat that card, I'm not beating anything. Oh, the
one of the cards that would have been in this category, but I just wish it was good, was the Swashbuckler's Whip. Like that card seems like it could have been so sweet. The activated ability of an 8-tap Discover 10 is just such a neat line of text.
It is,
but the card is just not good. I really wish. I guess it would have been way too obnoxious if you didn't have to spend mana to tap. I wonder if it was 1 to cast, 1 to equip, and it was 1 tap target creature. I wonder if that would have maybe gotten over the finish line. That could have been cool.
Yeah. Again, I mean, this is the type of card that falls to the wayside, right? When the impetus on the players is to do so many impactful things so early that this type of stuff just completely falls off the map. What was the biggest groan test? For me, I know this card's just very good. So there's a lot of very good cards that fall into this category that this category is meant a little bit more for the type of card that ends a game that would have otherwise been good, right? Not just, they played a really good card and now I'm going to lose. And this one's a little closer to that, but it still felt that way to me every single time, which is Zoetic Glyph. Like they play the stupid siren, the Oaken Siren, and then slam this thing on it. And you're just like, I am so miserably far behind at this point that it feels like the game's kind of over and it's turned freaking 3.
I've got a couple candidates. One is, I mean, besides again, the obvious, like, just the best cards in the set. Right. One is It's Quinth, the 2-3 red-green thing. Cause it's like, that makes your dinosaur fight theirs. What happened with that is like, okay, we've got this game. Then they're like, I'm going to play this card. It's going to eat one of your cards, maybe even a big one because I have another dino that can fight bigger. And I'm getting attacked now by 2 creatures to a 0 creature deficit or something. And then Sanguine Evangelist was another one where it's like the 2/1 that makes a 1/1 bat, then makes a 1/1 bat when it dies.
Oh, yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
You'd have your like, I've got a good draw, 2-drop into 3-drop, maybe even had a 1-drop. And then they go 2-drop and they play this on turn 3 and you're like, ugh. Because it's like the game's not over. You have to play, but like that thing's gonna eat like 2.5 of my cards. It's just like
totally.
There's no getting around it.
There isn't, and it's just
there's
like
no
this
clean
stop
answer.
sign.
There's just nothing,
Nothing. Yeah, totally. That's a good one. What was the most frustrating bad card to lose to, or maybe a card that you just won't miss playing against?
The most frustrating bad card to lose to, I think for me was probably Hurl Through History, the counterspell.
Oh, sure. Yeah. The expensive one.
I tried playing that card, atrocious. But as you know, I like drafting it as send deck, which means you're more likely to lose to that card than if you draft Dinos or Jeskai. And whenever I lost that card, it's like, this card shouldn't work. It's not good, but it is actually good when it's on the stack, generally.
Right. There's a lot of cards like that don't see the stack very often, but when they do, they're very, very good. One of the ones that I ran into is Fabrication Foundry, which this is another, like, it got lost in the build around shuffle, and it just never feels like it should ever work. It's also
how ridiculous of a card. It's an artifact build around in a set where we just talked about how it was literally free to have all artifacts in your deck. Right. Every artifact card always worked. And this card still didn't.
And it still just didn't. And when somebody actually did it, there's something weird that happens psychologically when somebody beats you with a bad card or a card that you think is bad, right? Which is that it feels unfair, like unjust, which is ludicrous, right? They totally beat you with the dang thing, and they did whatever they needed to do to get to that point. But it feels for some reason very frustrating when you're like, but I know that you're not supposed to play that or win with that card. Like on average, that wouldn't happen, but it did this time. And so it feels extra bad. This one's,
they even tried to save you for a little while. Couldn't play it on Arena, had a big red X over it.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's funny. This is one of my favorite arts too, the Fabrication Foundry. It has a very watch-like thing, right? Like the 2 things that are like, it's going to put its arms on basically, and they're watch crowns. I mean, they just are. They're like the winding part on a watch. Maybe I should have picked that one. This is one of the easiest that we've had in a while for this. Sometimes there's like, well, there's what was the bombiest bomb, the card you wanted to open, pack one, pick one in your seal pool? And it is, of course, our boy, the Bone Horde Dracosaur.
Yeah, not even close. Actually trying this one out in Vintage Cube, and it's been solid. It doesn't have haste like Thundermaw and Glorybringer and whatnot, but if it lives, you just win. And in limited, like I had the experience last weekend in the Open where I'm playing against someone in draft number 1, and I'm playing like red-green dinos. And they were playing red-green as well. And at one point they discovered and they flipped past Bone Horde Dracosaur in game 1. And I was just like, my heart just sank because I'm like, ugh, because like it wasn't coming into play. It was going onto the bottom of their deck,
But it's out there.
And I was winning game 1, right? Like I won like a turn or 2 later.
No.
But I was just like, knowing that card is in their deck just makes me so unhappy.
Yes, that card is brutal. It's also a great case study in card evaluation, because if you remember, you and I had a discussion about this versus Aklazats, which is also, it's the second best card in the set. And I predicted that Aklazats would be better. Not because it's necessarily more powerful, but because lifelink matters a lot in these scenarios, because you start to really split hairs about, what's good, what's not, when you're talking about these like absurd bombs, with all this text that's all amazing for you or whatever. But it turns out first strike good enough and as you said, even in Vintage Cube, but 100% in Limited, if you get to untap with it, it was ludicrous. I mean, this is one of the most pushed cards we've seen in a while, the Bonehorde Dracosaur. And it was our preview card. Thank you very much. Best common for each color got interesting. For white, it was Ultec Cloud Guard, but it was tied with Miner's Guidewing. And that's another, nod to the 1-drops there. Blue was easy. It was Waterwind Scout. That one stood out from the beginning as a standout common. Black is really interesting. Maybe it just shows how much it struggled, but you know what ended up being number 1 by 17 lands was Tithing Blade. Join the Dead was number 2. I would have guessed Join the Dead would be number 1 just because even though what we talked about before is a knock on the spot that traditional removal held, you do still want these tools in your arsenal. It's just not as much of a priority as you'd assume. And, the black creatures were bad. So I thought Join the Dead would be number 1, but it was Tithing Blade, which I liked. I kind of get it, but it was like, wow. And then red was Atali's Favor, followed by a Braid. And then green was another no-brainer with Pathfinding Axejaw, which I thought was a triumph of green common design. That is exactly where you want to be.
Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable.
What was the best what was the mythic uncommon for the set? Another easy.
Oh, Zoetic Glyph.
Yeah. By a lot.
By quite a bit. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, let's see. I'm gonna look on 17 lands and see what do you think the second best uncommon was?
It's Quinth, maybe? The red-green.
Let's see. It says it is Spyglass Siren. So another 1-drop, then a Deep Cavern Bat, and then it's Quinth.
Yeah, that's all fair.
4. Yeah. So, and then by the way, the next one is Ruin Lurker Bat, the card that we picked. So there you go. Oh my God. What a miss here. What was the worst card in the set? The biggest blank, the most last pick. The card I picked for this is Contested Game Ball. And this is a double whammy because this is like a potentially very cool card with a neat little design space that's a part of the cultural references that they used for this set. It is the artwork looked pretty cool. A lot of fun, interesting things come to mind when you think, hey, if we were going to make a card off of this, what would we come up with? And somehow it ended up being this card that was like so bad for the person that cast it, yet they had to put the mana and the card into the investment so that it was just like this huge disincentive from actually playing it at any point. Very weird that this card made it all the way through being as bad as it is, and also being a colorless uncommon in an artifact set where that's a fairly valuable spot. You kind of wanted that one to be something, and it's like, it's not interesting. There's no build around. It's just bad. It's like, what happened with Contested Game Ball?
Yeah, it is pretty wild. Like, I think, look, you have some room to make cards like that are basically all story. I don't really know why they made a card that was just like quite so bad. Like, that card is just atrocious. Like, it's really hard. It's like actually a challenge to make a card that's that bad. So it is interesting that they chose to use a slot on that. But I mean, well,
they get their treasure token.
At least it tells a good story.
It does. And that part was cute. And I definitely understand that some cards are more top down, kind of storyteller, but I just felt like a slot that should have had something a little more playable there. What card was the most begrudgingly playable?
Shipwreck Sentry, the 2-mana 3/3 that it can only attack.
That's a good one. That's a really nice. That's a real. You are really the GOAT of finding the begrudgingly playable. That is a beautiful Shipwreck Sentry. I like that. Is there a card you're going to miss drafting?
Oaken Siren. I thought about it some more. Oaken Siren is just my favorite of the cards, I think.
Okay. Well, we have a spot for it, so we'll see if you actually elevate it all the way to getting that award in a few minutes, because that's where you got to put your money where your mouth is, Luis. You can say, "Oh, I love that card; it's my favorite," but that's where it's like you stamp it into history as being your favorite. One of the cards that I'd miss drafting is Geological Appraiser. Cards like that are so safe, right? You just look at that type of card and you're just like, get me to that 4 mana and I'm just getting value. I'm affecting the board. I'm doing things. And I like having a card like that every once in a while. I know it's easy mode, right? There's not a lot of decision making around.
So you're saying you like powerful cards?
I like powerful cards that are a little bit unknown. It's the mix of raw power, which it has, but also like, I don't know what I'm going to hit. I'm going to have to make a decision perhaps about whether to keep the card or play it. And I like that part too. It's got a little gamble in it. What was the LSVS card in the set?
I think the LSVS card might be Chupacabra Echo.
Definitely. You love that thing.
First of all, it's the kind of descendant, or I think it comes later, right? It's the Echo. It comes after the Ravenous Chupacabra.
It's the Echo,
and I feel like Ravenous Chupacabra has always been my spirit animal, just for obvious reasons. It also is like a good synergy builder, and you have to like build your deck around it, and it's powerful and it eats things. I don't know. I like the Chupacabra Echo.
There's a lot to like.
Every time I opened one of those, I was always like, ooh. I was like a little happy, you know? Yeah.
And it has that build around angle too. It is good on its own, but it's like much better if you can recur it or whatever. I think the most martialist card was Clay Fired Bricks, which I know maybe you wouldn't think so, but one type of card that I really do love, and by the way, this is a little foreshadowing for my favorite card in the set too, are cards that create a little bit of a mini game and give you a little bit of value. You know, with Clay Fired Bricks, it's like it propels your game plan along, gives you a little bit of buffer, make sure you hit your land drops, but it also gives you a goal, right? It's like, okay, get to the craft portion of the game and this card will pay you back big time. Like this will be a huge swing back in your favor. And I really like incremental advantage, and I really like cards that give me targets or goals to go for, because I find that sometimes when I'm playing Magic, I won't always keep in mind what my exact plan is, right? I'll sometimes sort of just play that 80% autopilot mode where it's like, this makes sense. This is the best value. This is the most I can get. But when I have a very clear plan, or when I remember to really rethink about it during the course of the game, often I play a lot better. And cards like this help me aim at something, you know, hey, that's my goal, get to that point in the game. Did I have a soapboxiest card? I couldn't remember one that I really got.
I kind of don't feel like you did.
I don't think so. I guess we'll put Contested Game Ball there now because I just kind of soapboxed on it, but it wasn't. That was just till today.
Yeah, Contested Game Ball's funny. It is. It's funny how bad it is, but it's okay for cards to be bad. It's just like, I guess they really wanted this card to be horrendous, because this isn't like subtly bad. It's like,
right.
If this cost 0, would this be good? Like,
right. That's a good litmus
test. Would you choose
test
to have your opponent start with this and play? Like,
this is a weird one. I'm going to test you, Luis. Okay. Are you ready for this? Okay. This is what card do you still have to read when it's cast against you award? And I picked Zawoya Lavatongue.
Okay, that's red-black for 2/2 Death Touch, and it has Descend. At the end of your turn, if you descended, your opponent either sacrifices a permanent or loses 3 life.
That is very close. You got way further down that road than I would have. So it's each opponent may discard a card or sacrifice a permanent, and then Zawoya deals 3 damage to each opponent who didn't. So they can discard a card, sack a permanent, or take 3 life, or lose 3 life, and they're forced to that choice. But I'll tell you, man, every time somebody casts it, I'm like, what is that stupid thing? Because also it didn't show up that often, right? Like this wasn't a popular color pair either. So yeah, that mattered too. Okay, let's get into some of the big picture stuff here, Luis, as we're a little bit down the stretch. From a design and development aspect, how did the set fare? How are the mechanics? What were some of the wins, some of the losses? And by the way, the mechanics that we saw were Craft. There were double face cards. There were Descended, and then Descend 4, 8, and Fathomless. There was Discover, and then there was Explore and Map tokens.
Um, so I think craft was a kind of mediocre mechanic. It was okay, but it for sure wasn't great. And I think overall, like it played fine. The fact that it was like you gotta get cards out of your either your graveyard or in play. You got to read which one has the right types to do it all. Like it ended up, like I said, just being okay, but not being like
Yeah.
Great.
I felt like it had the thing that I like, which is get something now, do something later for more mana. But we've seen that in many different forms, right? Many, 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 many different forms. But it is a tried and true, awesome thing to do. But was the juice worth the squeeze? Because it was a little finicky and complicated to do. There was a learning curve to it. And even in play, you always had to kind of be aware of like what was in your graveyard, what was on the battlefield, and how you were going to do these things. It played totally fine. Like it was generally fairly easy to craft. It wasn't like a huge barrier. And I thought the design in that way was totally fine. But it's just like if you're a newer player and you read a craft card, all you're really doing ultimately is paying more mana later to do something else with the thing. And this whole like exiling and having it craft with certain things felt like a little too complicated for really what was just another, version of flashback or however, whatever mechanic you want to slot in there.
Yeah, I think it was just a little too crunchy. I do think craft was interesting. It kind of broke new ground a bit. I overall thought it was okay. Double-faced cards, I don't really count as a new mechanic. Like almost every set has some kind of double-faced cards. I will say the God Cycle was actually a bust. I don't think they did a good job.
Like a very large bust, right? Like those are supposed to be some of the best cards in this set and some of the ones that are the most exciting to open. And they weren't.
Yeah, they just weren't. I've definitely had the experience of playing with a bunch of these where it's like, okay, it dies, it comes back tapped, then I meet the conditions and then I transform it and it's still tapped. And it's like, I get that you didn't want to make it too easy, but it just felt really clunky and not smooth. It's kind of like, you remember Suspend, right? When you suspend a card and the counters come off. They talked about how in development, they changed Suspend at one point because it used to be that the Suspend numbers were a little lower, but the creature wouldn't have haste. And the reason they changed that was in playtesting, everyone just tried to attack right away because that was the natural intuitive thing.
Oh, okay.
You're trying to line up your designs generally to what people feel is right and works the way they want it to. And the gods, I don't think really did that. I think they kind of failed at that. So I think that that's a pretty severe drawback for, what should be the coolest cards in the set.
What about Descend?
Well, first of all, Descended and Descend, like having the two was kind of crazy to me. I don't really get that. Like, I get why they wanted, like, okay, well, this checks how many permanents you have in your graveyard, and this checks if this went this turn. It's still wild to me that a set went to print with this descends, this has descend, did you descend? Like,
it was a hurdle.
It's a bit much. I do think this mechanic is totally fine. It didn't really work because of the particulars of the set, but that's just sometimes how things are. I think it's always a shame when mechanics don't get a chance to play much, but I had fun with this set. It made this set dramatically more fun for me to play with, and I enjoyed doing so quite a bit. I drafted that deck a lot. Obviously, I would have been a little happier if it was like a little better, but still.
What did you think about Descend 4, Descend 8, and Descend Fathomless, or Fathomless Descent as they called it?
I think that was fine. I don't think that had to, like, they go really hard on keywording stuff now, like where it's like Descend 4, Descend 8, like they call it Fathomless Descent or whatever. But right. I think overall it's not unreasonable to have wanting to care about these different numbers.
Okay. Like, yeah, I felt like it felt a little inelegant, not terrible or anything like that, but just a little, there was these like sort of arbitrary speed bumps, mile markers. It was like, okay, I'm at 4, I'm at 8. This one doesn't care at all. I don't know. I feel like some of the mechanics that are a little, I get it that you don't want to have to track at all times exactly how many you have so that they use fathomless descent, not as often for that reason. But I don't know, feels a little difficult to stick the landing on the 4, the 8. Like, I mean, well, if it was descent 3, would have just been like, more competitive.
So that's more of like a development issue than a design issue. Okay. And we're grading them on both, Design wise, I think Descent's totally fine. Like it works as a mechanic. It's very grokkable.
So you like permanents in the yard or if a permanent went to the yard?
Well, I would have probably just picked one of the two or called them different things, but that's fine.
I kind of figured you might say that.
Yeah. But overall, I do like what was going on. But, this comes back to like, again, development where the fact that a lot of these kind of cool mechanics didn't really get a chance to play because of how the rest of the set was.
Yeah.
I mean, that is something you got to think about.
I mean, I think about that a lot because this is a cool mechanic. I'm nitpicking a little bit at the numbers and the little stuff, but this is a type of mechanic. This first mechanic I saw from the set, by the way, and I thought, all right, graveyard based mechanic. We are going to get ourselves a nice mid-rangey set with, they're not going to make this one of the headline mechanics and then not support it. And they did exactly that. It's not abandoned, but it is on the weaker side. You really feel like you're fighting uphill to make these type of decks work, just period. And it wasn't because there was one good aggro deck that was your, fun police. It was because the entire format was towards that low end of the curve and I throw Descent as another totally fine mechanic that goes on the scrap heap of history of the last 4 years or whatever, because these sets are so skewed towards early action that it's just yet another interesting mid-range mechanic that gets left behind.
Yeah. I mean, you do. It ultimately, you can have a perfectly fine mechanic that doesn't work because of the particulars of the set, which is what we're talking about. And is that mechanic a success? Yeah, you can say it's not a success. Like, I think that's a very reasonable conclusion to come to.
What about Discover? Did it fix Cascade?
I think Discover plays better than Cascade. I like not having a total miss. Like when you cast a Tali's Favor and you hit a combat trick, like you were bummed, right? You were like, man, this goes into my hand. Now they know about it. I didn't get the mana advantage. But when you cascaded into a useless combat trick, you just lost the card.
Right.
And Cascade's problem was honestly constructed. And I don't care about constructed when we're discussing it in this context. It's kind of like how I think Luris was an amazing limited card that I think Luris is the number one card in the history of Magic that adding it to a set increased my enjoyment by like that much. Like no other single card. Like I probably liked March of the Machines like 5% more because of the one card. Like, does that mean that Luris wasn't the best Magic card ever made? It's actually second. Contract from Below. If you don't know what this one, it's a banger.
Yeah.
1 black mana, sorcery, discard your hand, draw 7 cards, and then ante a card, or technically draw 8, ante the first one. But it's a 1 mana personal Wheel of Fortune, right? Luris is the second best card until they added the pay 3 mana companion part. But when they first printed it, it was 0 mana to companion. It was just the best card in Magic. And, obviously just wreaked havoc on Constructed, is banned in various formats. They had to change the rules. Obviously, the companions were a complete cluster for Constructed, but they were great for Limited. That was awesome. Like,
they're really good.
Us 40 card enjoyers, who like the finer things in Magic, we were having a great time with them. And so, yeah, Discover is totally great and Limited. It just plays super well. And the fact that Cascade and Discover both, cause some problems in Constructed, I don't care. That's a different topic. We can talk about that some other time. But Discover overall was totally fine. Like it's a fun mechanic. It's a spin the wheel mechanic. Spinning the wheel's fun. The problem in Constructed, it wasn't spinning the wheel. It was tutoring for the one card you could always hit.
Exactly. That's where that kind of thing breaks down. What about Explore? We got Explore back again and then map tokens as well. Explore plays pretty well.
I like the way these played. Explore and then, map tokens, which I kind of lump together a bit. The resolution of like you either draw the card, but it's a land, or you get a +1/+1 counter and you don't draw a card, but you also get to bin the card if you don't want it. I think that plays super clean. That is actually, R&D's job is to find a lot of mechanics that are not quite draw a card because they obviously put that probably too many places already. So like, it's always fun. What's better? Scry 2 or draw a card? Scry 3 or draw a card? What's better? Well, draw a card is certainly better than explore 1, but would you rather draw a card or explore twice? And sometimes they're the same because you get the land. And sometimes you actually really care about the counters to go in your spyglass there and you don't want to hit the lands. I think explore and map tokens play really well. And
Me too.
Map tokens were fun. They're a cool little gimmick to give you, like ETB get a map token is just like a super sweet card because they can't really make 1 mana 1/1 draw a card or 3 mana 2/2 flying draw a card. But giving you a map token, I mean, I guess Spyglass Siren was the best uncommon, but still, I think that those cards are really fun to play with and they work really well. And map tokens being little artifacts that hang out and play was pretty cool. So overall, I think those were great.
I want to see more of these. Yeah. I like map tokens. I like blood tokens. I like clues. Like these are more interesting ways to add a little bit of value.
Yeah. And so when you look at the mechanics all told, it's like craft was fine, a little fiddly. Obviously, the craft cards generally worked. Like they were in the best colors, but partially it's because the craft cards were good. They were well supported. They always worked. Double face cards basically wasn't a mechanic. I don't really count that as a unique mechanic. They just view the text box as having space on both front and back if they want, and that's just how cards work these days. Descend was, I think, a good mechanic that whiffed because of the particulars of the set, or at least was dampened by the particulars of the set. And I think Discover was great, Explore was great. Why didn't these add up to a more favorable review of the set overall, especially when you consider that we like the set, I think, more than our listeners, at least. I think we can be really confident in that. It's because the one drops attacked you too quickly, because the black was kind of minimized as a color that you could draft. Too many of the color pairs missed. Like, again, 10 color pairs plus caves. We didn't talk about caves here because we kind of covered it earlier. But 10 color plus caves. So that's just right off the bat 11 decks, right? And red green worked. It was even 2 decks. I'll even give it credit for both. White blue worked, red white worked, red blue worked. I don't give any of those credit for having multiple decks because I don't think they played out extremely differently.
Sure. Yeah.
I would say black green worked. I don't think it was an all-star, but I think it kind of works. Maybe half credit.
It gets a checkbox. Yeah.
It's 5.5, right? Well, blue green never works at this point. I mean, we'll see when that changes. Maybe it will. Black white. I don't think worked. Red black definitely didn't work. And I actually think blue black was below the bar. I think if you look at green black and blue black together, they're like one archetype in terms of like maybe 75% green black, 25% blue black or something. And caves didn't work. So we're talking about 6 out of like 11 archetypes. That's less than I would like to see in a set. Like when 2 or 3 color pairs miss, that's fine, especially if whatever the 11th or 12th archetypes work, like if 5 color works or caves works or whatever. But when like 5 of them miss or something or around that much, you start to feel it. It reduces replayability. It makes you feel stupid for taking a black card early. Yeah. It makes you not want to take, an expensive card because it's like, wow, this format's over too quickly. And I think overall that's what led to a lot of the negative reception surrounding Lost Caverns, despite looking at the mechanics individually thinking, yeah, these are a solid set of mechanics.
I'm starting to just get very worried, that we've entered an era where the sets are going to be like this kind of going forward, and even more so, like as power creep continues to have its effect on limited as well, that there's just too much, again, mid-range type mechanics that are interesting and just are not touchable. The one that worked here was craft. But the only reason it worked is because they gave you something up front, and they pushed it enough so that those upfront things were just good enough to be playable. And then occasionally you get to craft something for expensive amount of mana and it would put you over the top. But ones like Descend, They don't give you anything up front. They're just a later game, middle game type thing where it's like, you need to set this up, get to Descent 4 and come back and we'll talk later. And it turns out that, that didn't happen. And Descent 8 was a joke, right? That wasn't even a thing. So I feel like we've had this conversation a lot of times where it's like there was really, Caves, of course, is the headliner for this too. There's a lot of interesting design space that is being thrown out because you're being attacked by a 1/1 for 1 with some abilities. And I don't like that trend. I do enjoy very slow formats, and I know that people know that, but that's not even what I'm advocating for here. I'm just saying the normal mid-range stuff is being squeezed out in favor of, for lack of a better term, aggression, but I would call it speed in the way that Sirkovitz defined it when he was on the show. And I want a balance. I want something that's at least in the middle, if not slower every once in a while. And it feels like that isn't like that. They're going to have to like make a conscious decision to make that work, because if you keep making the 1-drops this good, then they become the priority and everything else falls in line behind them. What are the
good news is after looking at Murders of Markov Manor or Karlov Manor, whichever one it is.
Karlov, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Karlov Manor. It looks like a really slow set, and like all the expensive cards are going to be great. There's no good cheap cards. I think it's exactly what you want, Marshall.
I don't believe you for half a second. I haven't looked at the cards yet.
I'm making it up. I haven't looked at any of the cards.
Yeah, but there's no way that they're going to make like slow vampires or whatever. Right?
When we get to the sign-off, there's one card I've definitely seen. I've seen a bunch of them, but I haven't really seen them in overall capacity.
Okay. What did the format teach you? Is there something that made you better at limited, or what are the takeaways? I know for me, a few things stood out. One of them is that simple is good, right? The red-green Dinos deck was awesome. Some of the complicated mechanics did end up working like craft, but they did require a bigger lift up front, right? And that, to me that's a cost. Again, I always try to look out for newer players. I always want people to enjoy limited as much as Luis and I have over the years, but that means that the bar for entry needs to be low enough for them to be able to get in. And, cards or mechanics like craft and stuff can be difficult. Double face cards, too many of them can be overwhelming for newer players. And we don't have core sets anymore. There isn't as much of a way to onboard new people. So, I do like it when they really stick the landing on something simple like red green dinos. Also the 1-drops.
I agree that we've been trending a little bit like more in this direction than I guess I would have liked, but this can always vary. And the folks in play design do listen to what the community says. And LCI was kind of panned. So like, it doesn't mean the next set's going to change because they're locked in for the next year or whatever, however far in advance. So I think their design window might be getting a little bit shorter. I'm not sure. Okay. Probably couldn't. The physical limitations of printing cards does always make it so it's still hard to be less than a year or plus. But I wouldn't be surprised if they pulled back on 1-drops a little bit. Like, they're Magic players. They play these sets too. They listen to what people say, and like, I do think it's enough people have said that. And they also look at the metrics. Like, I'm sure that the number of people who draft on Arena is a number that does matter to some degree. It eventually gets to the people who make the cards, and they're like, okay, what is the difference here? So I think Magic's fun when there's a range. Not every set should be super fast or super slow or in the middle. Every set there should be a range. And we've been on the aggressive side of the range for a little bit. So I would expect a bit of a pullback. Like, if you look at the last couple of years, like, I don't know, Kaldheim wasn't very fast. Strixhaven had some fast decks, but it wasn't always fast. Like, you could cast
Strixhaven was appropriately slow, but it was also multicolored,
Yeah. I mean, there have been sets that haven't been super fast in that slower strategies and more expensive cards have some time in the sun.
It is not extinct. That's for sure.
Yeah. I would agree with you that like going too far in the other direction isn't great.
Yeah. And again, I don't need it to be super slow. I just need that like some of these really cool design elements that they've brought in get a little bit of like I thought you put it really well just a few minutes ago that you don't feel silly, for taking a card that, I want to take this Descend payoff. And it's like, what are you doing? Like, are you crazy? There's a 1/1 for one that has flying. Like, you have to take that. Get out of here, right? That's the part that I think that I would love to see the adjustment on. Okay. What grade would you give Lost Caverns of Ixalan?
I would give it a B-. Me
too.
I think
that's the same.
I think that it's a serviceable set. I had a good time playing it. I hadn't played it in a little bit before the arena opened, but then I had a good time playing that too. I mean, barring the fact that I got crushed in the second draft, but that's not a set specific complaint. That's a me losing complaint.
That's a player specific. Yeah. Yeah. For me, I gave it a B- as well. And I think that the two big picture points that I want to make with that is, one, the system works. I know that I've been complaining about it a lot this episode, about this whatever implementation that they use to come up with the baseline for the sets, that there's some concerns that I have about it, that it's squeezing out the mid-range strategies and stuff, but it does work. It creates relatively balanced sets, not horrendously imbalanced at least. And it has the bread and butter stuff that we keep coming back to as limited players. And that really matters. Like that they get credit for that. I can see why they've gone this direction. It does give them, can you imagine starting from scratch every single time? It would be impossible, right? So it does have its benefits. And it means that when you zoom out, that at least in my mind, even a set like this is totally fine and totally draftable. The other point, though, that I did want to make is that it does affect the replayability of the format for somebody like me, where I get to draft 50, and then if the vintage cube is up, that's going to catch my attention. And and they had a particularly long run with the vintage cube this time, but I basically didn't go back to LCI after that. And normally I will. Normally it'll be like, oh, holiday cube, and then it'll be like, okay, let's get back to main set, and I'll run it out until the end. And I didn't this time. And that's not normal for me. So you do miss out on some of that. And I assume that would come through in the numbers that you mentioned as well, Luis. What was your favorite card in the format? Is it Oaken Siren?
It is Oaken Siren.
It is Oaken Siren. Wow. All right. You put your money where your mouth is. Mine was Master's Guide Mural, which is a card you mentioned earlier that makes the golems. And it is, to me, a game plan within a card, and I love cards like that. It's built around to a point, but it doesn't require much. If you're in those colors, it just kind of happens naturally. But it's mainly a conceptual, this is something that I can try to make happen that is powerful, is a bit too slow for the format, but not so much that it's like horrendously embarrassing or whatever, and gives you a goal to go for that gives you a nice high upside and a payoff that can actually win you the game. So that's just my kind of card. I love cards like that. And this ended up being my favorite card in the set and the one that I wanted to open the most. Also, the fact that it did fit into one of the better archetypes didn't hurt either. Set review next week, Luis.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to be murdering people at a mansion or a manor or whatever.
We'll be collecting some evidence.
All right. So we'll see how this goes next week. That's going to do it for this episode of the show. Thanks so much for listening to us. We really do appreciate it. We will be back with set review, as we said, next week for Murders at Karlov Manor. That's also the format for the PT, so I'm going to be paying extra special attention to that one because I'm going to be in the booth for that. We wanted to say thank you to all of our patrons for your support of the show. Again, I mentioned it earlier, but it really does mean a lot to us, and we thank you. Thank you. Also, we want to thank Ultimate Guard for their support of the show. If you want to check out their products, again, you can go to ultimateguard.com. And if you want to pick them up, you can go to your local game store. Most of them carry it. Or, of course, your favorite online game store. And that will also have Ultimate Guard products there. We cannot recommend them highly enough. They're really the top quality stuff in the business. That will do it for this one. We'll see you next week.
All right, I do just want to highlight a card from Murders of Markov Manor here. It's Krenko's Buzz Crusher. It's 2 red. It's a 4/4 artifact insect thopter with flying and trample. All right?
Mm-hmm.
And when it enters the battlefield...
Say again the first part.
4 mana, 4/4 flying trample.
Okay. That's
whatever. When it enters the battlefield, For each player, destroy up to one non-basic land that player controls. For each land destroyed this way, its controller can search for a basic land and put it on the battlefield tapped.
Okay.
Do you know what's notable about this card?
No.
It doesn't target. It just says for each player, destroy up to one non-basic land they control. So it can blow up Lotus Field in Pioneer.
No way.
And I find this card to be extremely offensive to my design sensibilities because you put hexproof on the card, and now you print a card that should just say target. There's no real reason for it to not say target, except that they want it to blow up Lotus Field. And it's like, this is the hackiest nonsense I've seen since like Great Sable Stag. And that, if you don't know what that is, look it up.
Yeah, look up that little targeted nuclear
is
weapon.
Worse because the whole point of hexproof is to protect against targeted removal. This just is targeted removal.
And that's ridiculous. I'm surprised.
I don't feel that way when someone edicts your creature. You're like, I've got a 4/4 hexproof and they had an edict. Wow, they got me. I played True Name Nemesis. It has protection from everything, but they Liliana'd me. Like that's emergent gameplay. That's like how you answer it. And
right.
The
and
way
that's
you can
a trade-off
by having
because
creature tokens.
Right, because edicts are worse in general. So
And this is just like, no, we wanted to kill Lotus Field because it's a problem. So let's just make it get around hexproof for no reason. It's like, sure. You can do that. Obviously, it's a functional card. It probably will do something, but it's like, this is not, I mean, look, it is a challenge to find a way to answer Lotus Field if that's your problem with cards you print. But that's the skill in design, right? That's the artistry, is to find ways to do that without just writing hacky game text. So I'm not a fan of this card, and I'm sure it's going to be a good card and all that, or whatever. I haven't even really evaluated it that much. I just know I don't like it. So that's your first review of a card from Murders of Markov Manor.
Karloff.